Welcome to the Tall and Urban podcast by the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat. This is Daniel Safarik. This is Season 1, Timber Rising, sponsored by the USDA Forest Service. We're talking with leading experts about mass timber, a way of building with engineered wood products that is gaining traction around the world. Today we're talking to Tim Gokhman, Managing Director, New Land Enterprises. His company is building Ascent, a 25-story mass timber residential building in Milwaukee. Tim, welcome to the podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
So, I guess the basic question about the Ascent project, which is going up now in Milwaukee, is why did you choose to build with timber and why now?
Well, so there's more than one reason, and in chronological order, the reason why mass timber got our attention was the aesthetics. We saw renderings for the River Beach Tower project in Chicago, which were done by Perkins and Will and Thornton Tomasetti, and I just had never seen anything like it before. And I didn't know that wood was frankly capable of carrying such structural loads. And so the combination of kind of that power plus the aesthetic superiority of exposed wood really made me curious about it. And so I forwarded that article to our architect, Jason Korb, who was already familiar with mass timber. He had heard Michael Green speak years earlier, and it caught his attention as well. And the rest of our development team. And New Land has had a long history of differentiating, either through site selection, design, or even material use. And so this seemed like a really cool avenue to explore. And that's what we did. We contacted Jason. We said, Jason, we'd like you to explore the possibility of building with mass timber, really knowing very little about it.
Was it a struggle to convince investors that this was going to be a good way to go forward?
Investors care about different things than, potentially your, certainly than media and certainly than your potential renter. And so, because it's a commitment, right? You're putting your money on the line, and there's risk. And so you really have to be thoughtful about what the downsides could be and how you plan to control those. And that's where, to your earlier question of what we perceive the benefits to be, that's where I think that mass timber can actually offer as much, if not more, benefit than risk, right? So some people will say, well, it hasn't been done before. How do you know you can do it? Are there questions about supply chain? Are there questions about storage and treatment of materials on site, so on and so forth. But we already know, right, that from other people building these buildings, that it actually builds more precisely and faster and cleaner, not from just a carbon standpoint, although that's a separate topic, but there's just less welding, cutting, et cetera on site. And it builds with a smaller labor force, which especially right now, but really even pre-pandemic, we've had so much pressure on the labor markets, and mass timber just solves so many of those issues. And so I think that all of those things are things we had discovered after we went down the path of looking at mass timber. But all of those things, if you really think about them holistically, I think make a great case as to why this is a wonderful building material.
Right. So I was going to ask you about the cost benefit ratios and what they look like, and where do you see them bending in favor of timber as opposed to a more conventional high-rise construction means?
Yeah, so for multifamily, right, you're typically seeing PT, right, unless you're going with a super tall, and that's certainly not the case in Milwaukee, or frankly for the majority of the United States.
You mean post-tension concrete?
Yeah. Post-tension concrete is typically the choice for multifamily. And so what's interesting about PT is that its cost varies significantly between different markets in the United States. And in Milwaukee, it's relatively speaking pretty affordable. And so to make mass timber work in Milwaukee was a challenge. And we, to precisely identify exactly what the delta is next to impossible. To really do it precisely, you have to design the building both in PT and mass timber, which is two separate engineering exercises, and then cost them out. And no one's going to do that. And so you're going to have to ballpark it, right? You're going to have to rely on your prior knowledge of what a building like this would cost in PT, and then you go and get the pricing in mass timber. And we are certainly paying a premium for the material, for the timber structure versus what would it cost in PT. There are the additional factors of balconies and soundproofing and so on and so forth. But there are offsets in the reduced cost of the foundation, in the construction time frame, and so on. And so for us, we think that it's about par or maybe a slight premium, but we think the premium is worth it, both from marketing exposure and the ability to lease, the ability to stand out in the marketplace. And frankly, the numbers work. And that's critical, right? You can't do mass timber just for the sake of doing mass timber. It still has to make economic sense. And the numbers did work. And so even if it would have been slightly less expensive to do it in PT, we saw the case for mass timber as strong enough to go ahead with the project in this design.
Excellent. And, one of the, I think maybe people do have, on the one hand, the association of having this project in Milwaukee is a little bit off the map for the traditional perception of, mass timber from the U.S. coming from mostly the Pacific Northwest and the Southeast. And where are you actually sourcing it from in the end?
We ended up getting it from Austria, which is kind of crazy. And I look, and this is where we rely on our partners, right? So we were working with Slinnerton, who's been tasked with both the procurement and the logistics of getting the timber on site and getting it installed. And we rely on them, and they have really great people on their team who are, fiber experts. They get it down to that granular level. And our ultimate assessment was that the best choice for us was KLH in Austria, one of the most storied and experienced mass timber suppliers. But in the long run, we see Katerra firing up in the United States, and and some smaller producers like Deere Johnson and Vaughan Timbers, et cetera. And so, so you see production starting to ramp up in the United States, and I think that it's just the tip of the iceberg. And once that production becomes more common, prevalent, experienced, you're going to see more efficiencies, and pricing is going to come down, and speed is going to go up, and options are going to increase, and it'll be really, really exciting.
So are there plans to expose the timber within the units or in the common areas, or how are people going to experience this once it's built?
Yeah, we tried to expose as much as was, kind of practically possible. So within the apartments, in the living spaces, so basically in the living rooms and in the bedrooms, we've tried all of the CLT is exposed, with the exception of some lids above the kitchens and in the hallways where some mechanicals are passing. The vast majority of the CLT is exposed in the units. With the columns and beams, once you get to the back of the floor plan, some of that's encapsulated, if you're in a closet or you're in a bathroom. But yeah, we've tried to keep as much of the aesthetic as possible, because to us, that if that was the main reason for us to do the building, then we think that's the main reason for someone to move into the building.
Was there any sort of marketing research that was done about any focus groups, anything like that, to try to figure out if people would respond better to a timber construction?
No. This is where we rely on gut feeling. We just knew, because again, we did have buildings in Milwaukee with exposed wood elements. We already know that people really prefer that, all else being equal, and so I don't think there's even a need, frankly, for focus groups or anything like that. But yeah, the interest, this is what's different, I think, about a mass timber building, is that all of a sudden people who are not in the real estate world or in the building industry want to talk to you about how the building is made.
Right.
And I don't think that's a thing for regular buildings, right? All of us that go into our offices or apartment buildings, I think most people don't really stop and think about, like, hey, how is this built? But with mass timber, people want to know. They're curious, whether it's how it stands up in fire, or where did you get it from, or how did you come up with the idea, or how does it work, so on and so forth. People are just fascinated by it, and I think that's awesome. It's the same. It's the same thing as when we become curious about where food comes from.
Exactly.
Right, or where whatever comes from, and all of a sudden we're like, hey, I spend a lot of time inside my built environment. I wonder how that was made, where it came from, etc. And so I think that's a great conversation to have.
Great. Excellent. Tim, thanks for spending time with me today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on.